Mythology is not a lie. Mythology is poetry. It is metaphorical. It has been well said that mythology is penultimate truth. Penultimate because the ultimate cannot be put into words. It is beyond words, beyond images, beyond that bounding rim of the Buddhist wheel of becoming. Mythology pitches the mind beyond that rim to what can be known but not told. Welcome to the Introduction to Stories. Now, to get us started, I want you to think of a shallow movie that you've seen. Think of a movie that, as soon as you got out of theater, you're like, oh, that was terrible. Or even an episode that you saw on TV and you're like, wow, that was terrible. How long did you think about that story? Probably not very long. When I see a really terrible story, I forget about it as soon as I get into my car. Or I'll talk about the bad parts, the ones that made absolutely no sense. Why would that character do that in that circumstance? I can't even imagine a time where, if motivated as that character was motivated, where I would make a decision that bad. So on the reverse side, though, think about the opposite. Think about those stories that are not only very deep, but define your life. When you get out of a movie and you saw a very amazing, deep, fantastic movie, how long does it stay with you? For some, it will stay on their mind for months on end. They'll talk about it with their friends. Oh, have you seen that movie? It's fantastic. And once the friend or acquaintance sees it, they go on talking about their favorite parts and how their mind was blown by so-and-so. And then think about those really great moment-defining movies. The movies that become a part of a person's life. Their entire world gets rearranged around the movie. They argue with their friends about the deeper meaning of said movie, the best character, the character interactions, who would win in a fight, why they did that, how certain characters are fighting their own destruction, and then little things like greed end up being the tool that drives their very own destruction. Those movies give you a hint to the power of great stories. So keeping this in mind, think about those stories that have existed throughout time. So I'm not talking about those movies that end up defining a person's life. I'm talking about the great stories that define lifetimes, that go above time itself. Ones that have crossed civilizations, that were incorporated into culture instead of being destroyed, whose chief characters are reimagined to fit the new culture or to represent the new people, but whose motivations and struggles remain intact from hundreds to thousands of years. What are the depths of those stories right there? It's said that they have no bottom. They're bottomless. The depth keeps going. You can watch it one day and then the very next day learn something new. And that's because certain amounts of these stories have been fine-tuned over time, where each particular sentence contains within it vast amounts of not only historical, but personal knowledge as well. That's a characteristic of great stories. So why do they remain? What makes a great story? Well, think about this. If I told you what happened to me yesterday, I recorded some lectures and then I went home. I was a little hungry and I sat on my chair for about 10 minutes and then I got a little thirsty and I grabbed a drink of water and then I put the water down. And then I turned ever so slightly to look underneath my desk because I heard something roll off. And then after I didn't, I could see you guys getting bored already. And that's the point. What was in that story? I can imagine a lot of you saying, why are you telling me this? It's the same reason we don't see Thor's bathroom habits or watch Black Widow sew up her clothes and stitch up the holes. Nobody wants to see that. But if I told you that yesterday 3 people jumped me and threw me into a van with very thick zip ties. And I remembered a lesson that I have learned, that I remembered before. My father used to always tell me, if you take your tennis shoes and you tie them around the zip tie, you can actually bicycle your legs and bam, break free. Many of you would pay attention to that story. Now, why? Why pay attention to the first story versus the second story? It's not about facts. Both of them have facts. But one of the facts is more useful, more engaging, one that you may want to learn just in case you're in those types of situations. And that's exactly what makes up the difference between powerful stories and shallow ones, deep stories and great stories. So if this little aspect of truth is any key, then we can conclude that great stories have distilled truth. They sift out the noise. Nobody wants to see Thor's bathroom habits, but please tell me how he deals with Loki. That's the meaningful truth. That's what separates the regular stories from the good stories, and the good stories from the great stories. So then, what is it about great stories or myths that make them exist through centuries? They contain the same personal, meaningful, and powerful truths, but they have one major twist. Great stories and myths exist across cultures. So their truths are universal. This is what also is referred to as archetype, the universal truths that go beyond culture, that go beyond civilization, that are true at such a deep level, it's almost meta truth. It's the truth that needs to exist in order for truth to exist at all. That's what we call archetypes. Distilled over time, retold over and over again with different characters and different point of views. So archetypes are kind of the foundational stories that teach you universal truths. Now let's look at one of these archetypes called the hero myth. Imagine a group of people who are carving their way through the wilderness, and they decide to settle, more than likely near a stream, but they decide to settle, okay? So they settle, they conquer their area, they establish borders, and they start congregating, procreating, and building resources, all right? But the world outside their borders still exists. And as resources become thin and they amass theirs, the outside world starts taking note of what's going on inside those boundaries. And then the inevitable happens. The outside world goes in and attacks the civilization, taking what they want and returning to their own world. So then what happens? Well, the individuals of that village who are capable, disagreeable, and brave, they decide they're not going to take this sitting down. And those individuals go out into that unconquered world, that world of chaos, the world of villains, and they get their resources back and bring it to the village. Upon their return, if they return, the village celebrates. Suddenly, stories are told of their conquest. Myths are made of their journey to acquire it. All right? So that's the hero archetype. But now, let's break it down to see if you've heard it before. The hero, scarred by his encounter with the villain, must travel into the world of the villain, or the world of chaos, and fight the enemy in their own territory. As you can see, you've heard this many times. It is the foundational archetype of almost every heroic adventure you've ever heard. Why? Because we all deal with the same villains. We all carve out our areas and conquer our areas and secure our borders. But that which lies at the border does not simply go away. In fact, it grows in strength. And one day, the inevitability is that it will come into contact with your conquered world and then flee back to its place, if you're lucky. Sometimes it stays. But the point is, these great stories provide you with rules on how to deal with the world of chaos. These are the rules for life, and they will be the focus of our philosophical discussions and what you reflect upon weekly in your journal. You will ask yourself, what are the stories trying to tell us? What rules for life can we learn to deal with the chaos at the borders? And it is my hope that by the end of the year, you will have amassed a bunch of rules for life that help you deal with the inevitability of the villains that will show up in your conquered world. Look forward to a great year together.